and welcome to another episode of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. As always, I am your host, Robb Nelson, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is the subject of baseball, and specifically baseball in the state of Nebraska. Today I'm going to be joined in the first segment of the podcast by Megan Arrington-Williams from the Stuhr Museum Foundation. And then later on in the show, we are going to shift gears and head out to St. Paul, Nebraska, where I'm going to be speaking with the director of the Major League Baseball Museum of Nebraska, Loren Studley. So sit back and relax, and we're going to slide headfirst into some baseball historic content. Hello again, and welcome to a new episode of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. I am joined today by a member of the Stuhr Museum Foundation team, Megan Arrington-Williams, who is the Marketing and Developing Coordinator for the Stuhr Museum Foundation. It's her first time on the podcast, and we want to make her feel welcome. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. The reason I asked Megan to be a part of this episode is because on our staff, her and I are the only two people who have a high affinity for the game of baseball and baseball-related subjects. We also have a rivalry between us, myself being a Cardinals fan and her being a Cubs fan. So we thought, what better way to tackle the issue of baseball, which is the topic of the day, than to bring in Megan from the Stuhr Museum Foundation.
Yeah, I thought it was a great way to introduce myself to you when I saw that Cardinals bobblehead, I think it was on your computer, and I was like, not allowed to like you.
Yeah, that's true story. I grew up a Mark McGwire fan. He was the best home run hitter in the league at the time. You would maybe argue it was Sammy Sosa. We're a similar age, so maybe that is a topic we haven't addressed yet. But much has come out to the contrary to not support that opinion in the years since 1998, but I still have a very strong nostalgia for Mark McGwire.
Yeah, and the fact that really being from around this area, those were the only two professional teams that people could listen to on the radio.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I grew up in Colorado. I have married into a Cubs fandom, but I fully support the Cubs. The only time I don't is when they're playing the Rockies, and then even then it's a partial, yay, go Cubs.
Yeah. So what is your connection with the sport of baseball? What got you into the game, I guess?
Yeah, I grew up playing softball. I first started playing, in third grade, so I was 8 years old, and played up until high school when decided to focus on a couple of other sports. But we were a baseball family, softball family. My dad was a coach. My sister also played. And, that was something that I can remember with my grandparents listening to the games. And then growing up in Denver, when I was a kid, the Rockies were established in 1993. So I was younger and was able to see the establishment of a Major League Baseball team in my home state. And so,
wow.
Yeah, so that was really cool. So we followed them and then, came out here and continued my vast softball career by playing in slow pitch softball leagues in Hastings.
No shame in that. I support people playing, any form of baseball. It's one of those few recreational activities that you can really play throughout your entire life. There's little kids who are playing t-ball, and obviously you can go up and play organized baseball in all sorts of leagues and teams throughout your younger years. But there's also, as you said, slow pitch softball that brings in a crowd of people to celebrate the game even into their later autumn years of life. It's really a unique experience in that way. And if you haven't heard already, I'm going to be very nostalgic about this game because I do think it's the best sport just in general. It is America's pastime. I know football has kind of usurped the role of being America's favorite sport as of right now. But I'll be surprised if football's still a sport in 50 years, whereas I have no reservations about baseball enduring for years and years and years into the future.
It will be around, and we'll figure out who will step in and step up to take the place of those who might have to travel abroad as baseball players.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but this is a history podcast, and I know we want to delve into the history of this game a little bit. And I thought we'd take a unique spin on this since you and I are both Cubs and Cardinals fans, but we are also in Nebraska and have a connection with Nebraska at all. So I wanted to see if there was any relevance there, connection there to Nebraska and those teams. Do we know of any connection that has been made?
Yeah, so in 1908, when the Cubs won the World Series for the first time, Sam Crawford, who's a native of Wahoo, Nebraska, actually stepped up to the plate, struck out, unfortunately, and that helped the Cubs move on to win the World Series. So while it might not be the shiniest connection, that is definitely one connection. So
yeah, absolutely. And that would be the last time the Cubs would win the World Series in 1908 until 2016, and 108 years of absence in there. But the Cardinals, on the other hand, did much better, I must point out.
They slightly dominated the entire century that the Cubs were busy losing.
Yeah. But anyway, not that that's important. There is also another connection that I was aware of, and there's a native son of Nebraska that the St. Paul Major League Baseball Museum celebrates, and that's the story of Grover Cleveland Alexander, who was a baseball player, Hall of Famer, who played for both the Cardinals and the Cubs throughout his career, and his story is celebrated by that community a great deal. I believe their high school baseball field is named after Grover Cleveland Alexander, and there's all kinds of stories like that really make Nebraska a part of that rivalry, but also of baseball in general. So St. Paul isn't the only city that's, celebrates the sport of baseball in the state of Nebraska. There are also a number of historic fields throughout the state that kind of boast a connection to the sport of Major League Baseball and have had notable players, stand in the batter's box or play in the outfield. What are some of those fields that we're talking about?
Well, Duncan Field in Hastings has a really rich history. It was built in the 1940s, and it's a beautiful park. I mean, it's huge. When you think of a Little League ballpark, this is not what you think of. When you stand there at home plate and you're looking out and it's over 300 feet to the center field ball, you think of Little Leaguers hitting a ball out there, but then you can also think of the Hastings College baseball team that's played there for ages. The Sodbusters currently play there. The home to the Little League World Series team, they played there. And also Yogi Berra played there as a kid. So that's something that's pretty neat. He would travel through, and maybe not as a kid, but when he was younger, before he made it big and before he was, playing for the Yankees. So
yeah, there's the famous connection. I myself played there on a number of teams growing up. I played baseball at the select level, high school, and in college, and I played a number of these fields. There's a number of communities throughout Nebraska that claim some affinity for the sport of baseball, including Wakefield, Nebraska, which claims to be the baseball state capital of the state. They have a great field there as well that a lot of notable local talents have played on, and I love the connection that sport has played with our community and the talent that it fosters and the community support that it brings about through the process. One of the things, and I'll transition here, one of the things that really keeps the nostalgia of baseball alive in my life and in a lot of people's lives are movies about, great baseball moments, teams, people, etc. Some of them are even based on historical realities. And I know we were going to talk about A League of Their Own because it's so relevant even today. What are some of those realities from that movie? I know we're both big fans of it.
Yeah, so it's odd, and maybe it's just because we have that Cubs-Cardinals connection, but the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League actually was originated in Chicago in the Midwest, and Mr. Wrigley, who at the time was owner of the Cubs, had this idea that when the Chaps went off to war to fight in World War II, that they could make up some of that financial deficit and raise morale for folks by developing this female baseball league. Well, really, it was a softball league as it started out, and they would pitch underhand as they do currently in softball, and then they changed the rules later on. So that was in about 1942 when it was established.
Yeah.
And then by the 1948, 1950, they switched it over to what is now the Baseball League, and they're in the Professional Baseball Hall of Fame. But I think it's amazing that it was able to start here and it found so much success in the smaller towns because it was a big deal for folks in the smaller areas. You know, you go to New York City and their team, they didn't really care because they had other things to do and they were busy focusing on other things. So to see that these teams really thrived and developed and grew in this region was really cool.
Yeah, the first 4 teams, I believe, were Rockford, Illinois, Racine, Wisconsin, Kenosha, Wisconsin, and South Bend, Indiana. And from there, it really expanded. It did it tremendously well right off the bat, as you said, because, these small towns really bonded with their teams. Local residents went to games. They were able to talk to players. They were able to sit close to the stands and get to know their community. And that was a big part of baseball during that era at the major league level as well. When you see that the teams start to expand into the larger markets, they tried to expand into Minneapolis, they tried to expand into Chicago, you kind of saw the dissolution of that. There wasn't that same sort of acceptance or excitedness about the sport. And they weren't really mentioned in the newspaper, as you said, because there was a ton already happening. The connection that I think is really neat here is that that America didn't know if they wanted to keep baseball going during World War II, which was the point of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And Franklin Roosevelt himself, when asked this question, said, I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. I consider baseball a very good thing for the population during the war. That was a direct quote from him in January of 1942, right after Pearl Harbor. So you can kind of see where this conversation is going. There was actually a poll conducted at the time across America that asked the question, do you think that baseball should be continued or stopped during the war effort? And 67% of people said that it should be continued, while only 23% said that it should be stopped, and 10% had no opinion. But as you can see, I mean, it was an important enough issue that the president felt that he needed to comment on it, that there was polls that needed to be conducted. And I mean, at a time where it's estimated 500 Major League Baseball players enlisted into the war effort, the fan favorites weren't just going to be there. It wasn't going to be the same sort of product that was put on the field. So this was a realistic question that needed to really be addressed, I think.
Mm-hmm, certainly. And the fact for me as a female that women were given that place to shine. Yeah. Granted, they had to go through and wear, skirts and still take their etiquette classes while they were playing Major League baseball. But the fact that women were able to step up, as they did so much in that era because the men were off at war, really meant something to me. And to see it carried out through, A League of Their Own as a movie, as I watched as a little girl, thinking, oh my gosh, I can do that. But now thinking of it more from that adult viewpoint as how a sport can boost morale in such a huge way is really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much about that movie that it does get right. It's a historically accurate movie, in my opinion. They change a few of the names around, but a lot of the people are based on actual players, managers, owners. I think they make the owner, his name in that movie is Harvey. His last name's Harvey, but the real owner of the league was Wrigley of Wrigley Chewing Gum from Chicago, who was also the owner of Wrigley Field and the Chicago Cubs. And that person hires Jimmy Dugan, played by Tom Hanks, who's loosely based on Jimmy Fox, who played for the Chicago Cubs, home run hitter extraordinaire. So back to that Cardinals-Cubs connection again. I just have to hammer it home. But I find it really interesting, and it's a really good example of, the impact of the sport played in this small way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even thinking of it more recently, you think of just, as we're recording this, September 11th is this upcoming weekend. And when you think of 2001 and that first Yankees game back, they came back and played and the entire nation rallied around them. Yeah. Not just the city of New York. It was a game that, still thinking of, it gives me goosebumps just because it did mean so much to come back to some sense of comfort, I think. Not necessarily normalcy, because it doesn't feel normal, and like today might not feel normal, but it comes back to a sense of comfort, and I think that that's what baseball can do for us.
Absolutely. And there's also just this great tradition and just connection to the past. But, we talked about Sam Crawford, who is from Wahoo. We talked about Grover Cleveland Alexander from St. Paul, two notable Hall of Fame baseball players. And then you continue on, and even today, we still in the local papers, there's sections in the sports page about Nebraska players who are playing in the major leagues right now, or in recent memory, Alex Gordon, maybe a Hall of Fame baseball player. Jobber Chamberlain, takes Nebraska to the first College World Series and becomes a phenom for the New York Yankees. And so those traditions are still very much alive, and they're going to continue onward. And I think that's unique in baseball as compared to other sports.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I think we're going to pause here, and when we come back from the commercial break, I'm going to be heading over to St. Paul, Nebraska, to meet with a representative of the St. Paul Major League Baseball Museum. I'm really looking forward to that conversation, and I'm sure I'll get very nostalgic again. So stick with us, and we'll be back after these words.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Amanda Glade Millinery and Dressmaking Shop. For the very finest in hats, dressmaking, and fancy goods, visit the Amanda Glade Millinery Shop on the northwest corner of Depot and North Front Street. Dressmaking by appointment only. Spring and fall openings a regular occurrence. Come get your new chapeau at Millinery and Dress Shop by Amanda Glade.
And welcome back to more of the Stuhr Crazy podcast. I am joined today by Loren Studley, who is the director of the Museum of Nebraska Major League Baseball in St. Paul, Nebraska. Loren, thank you for being on the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me. Good morning.
I was really anxious to speak with you today because I am a big fan of baseball, and I have a baseball museum just down the road from me here in Grand Island. The first question I wanted to ask you was, what do you hope visitors take from visiting this museum, and what is the mission of the St. Paul Museum of Nebraska Major League Baseball?
Okay, so the Museum of Major League Baseball is to recognize and identify every player from Nebraska who played in the major leagues. To date, there's about 160 of those players, and what we really like our visitors to take from this is the heritage, the major baseball heritage that we have in the state of Nebraska. And for example, 4 of our 7 Hall of Famers come from small towns under 400 people. So yeah, I guess that's what we really want people to take from the museum is for a state the size of ours to have that many major league players is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, that is pretty unique. Who are those players that we're talking about? I know one is Sam Crawford. He's the famous alum from Wahoo, Nebraska, I believe. Who are a few of those other ones?
Well, there's so many I can't give you all the names, but I will give you the 7 Hall of Famers who we proudly display. We have a specified room in the museum for just our Hall of Fame players, and there's 7 of those. And I'll read those to you. They're Bob Gibson, Wahoo Sam Crawford, Richie Ashburn, Billy Southworth. We also have a gentleman by the name of Dazzy Vance from a small town down by Red Cloud, and Wade Boggs. And last but not least, the one we feature and talk about the most is Grover Cleveland Alexander.
Sure. And he's from Grover Cleveland is actually from St. Paul. Is that correct? Or he called it home?
He was born in Howard County up near Elba. He passed away here November 4th, 1950, and he's buried here. He was buried with veteran honors in our cemetery here in St. Paul.
I was kind of saying before the interview started, I'm a big fan of baseball myself. I was raised a Cardinals fan. I'm well aware of the Bob Gibson connection to Nebraska. He's an old Cardinal and from Omaha, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe one of the best baseball players to ever live. They had to change the rules of pitching in order to accommodate how good he was at his position. So Nebraska's had quite an impact on the sport, just in our own players that we've produced. Another question I wanted to ask you is, I'm really happy that there's a baseball museum in Nebraska. What was the process of determining that there should be a baseball museum in Nebraska? Was that a citywide kind of conversation, or how did that come about?
We recognized Grover Cleveland Alexander with a yearly celebration called Grover Days, and we had a beautiful exhibit put together on Grover, and we just decided to add to that. And in adding to that, we decided to set up the Museum of Nebraska Major League Baseball. And not only is his display really a big part of the museum, but so are the other 6 Hall of Famers. So I guess after we decided to do the Hall of Famers, we decided we had room in our facility to accommodate recognition of every Nebraska Major League player who played at least one inning of Major League Baseball. And that's kind of the story, and that's how it's evolved into what it is today.
That's really cool, and I encourage everyone who's listening to make the trip out to St. Paul and see it. And it expands, as you said, beyond just the museum, because when you pull into town, there's that great mural on the side of one of the buildings that's kind of promoting baseball in and of itself. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that was a project put on by a few of us here. A few volunteers got together and decided that what a neat opportunity and a place to put a mural up featuring baseball. And It turned out to be really good.
I assume you have a love of the sport, being that you are the director of this museum. What is your particular connection to the sport of baseball? Is it something that you played as a younger man or maybe coached?
Yeah, we had a Legion baseball program where I grew up, and I grew up in Greeley County. I went to school at Walback, and we had a Legion team. And I have such a big interest in the history of some of our players. Mostly Grover Cleveland Alexander has inspired me to talk about some of our Major League players and identify them and recognize them and tell people about them. Grover Cleveland Alexander is the 3rd winningest pitcher of all Major League Baseball of all time.
I did not know that.
373 wins.
373. Is it Cy Young, then Walter Johnson, and then Grover Cleveland?
Yes, correct.
Okay. What particularly inspires you about his story or who he was? Is there anything you'd like to share in more detail about that?
Well, just that he was born up in Howard County, up by Elba, Nebraska, and went on and he still has Major League Baseball records intact. And I suppose the story that tells it all is, for me, about Grover Cleveland Alexander is, during the peak of his career, he also had to go into World War I and fought in the front lines of the European theater. During the prime of his career, he was taken off to war. But he returned and still was a Major League great pitcher and went on to accumulate 373 wins. And probably the one cool thing, and it's a memorable thing, is the 1926 World Series. Grover Cleveland Alexander was a starting pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, and they faced the New York Yankees. He had won Game 2, pitched it complete, and won it. He had pitched Game 6 complete and won that game. And in 7th inning of Game 7, they called Grover Cleveland Alexander in with bases full at the top of the order, facing Tony Lazzara, Babe Ruth, and Lou Gehrig.
Wow.
And Grover Cleveland struck out Tony Lazzara, went on and saved Game 7 for the St. Louis Cardinals.
Wow. I did not know that story. As a Cardinals fan, I'm a little bit ashamed that I didn't.
Yeah, and we have a beautiful picture in his display area that shows that game. And, by the way, they made a movie about Grover Cleveland Alexander. Ronald Reagan played Grover, and Doris Day played his wife, Amy.
Yeah, I did know that. Well, what was the name of that again?
Winning Team.
The Winning Team. Yeah.
Is the name of the movie.
Yeah, doing research for the show, I did stumble across that. Yeah, back in Reagan's early acting days. You mentioned the World War I connection. I think baseball has such a great it's interlocked and interwoven with the history of America in that way. And in World War I, there was veterans that went overseas to participate in the conflict. In World War II, it was the same way. And even, earlier in, the Civil War days, when soldiers were getting together in the 1860s for the first time, and when there weren't fights happening or battles happening, they'd play baseball. And as a result of those games being played, when the kids or young men went back home after the war, they brought baseball to their local communities. And from there, the sport really grew to be a nationwide pastime that we all know and love today in terms of the recognizable sport that it is. I've always just found that really interesting, how interlocked everything is that way with the game.
Yes, that is an interesting connection. Yes, it is.
So back to just kind of talking about the museum itself, do you have a particular artifact that the museum has that's of special significance that you really hope visitors view and appreciate?
Well, we have several.
Yeah, exactly.
But the one that stands out in my mind as one of the neatest pieces of memorabilia is the fact that we have Grover Cleveland Alexander's glove that he pitched with in the 1926 World Series. And we have a signed baseball from all the St. Louis Cardinals winning team on display.
Wow.
To me, that's one of the neatest and coolest art pieces of memorabilia that we have.
Without question. I mean, that's holy grail for the period and the topic that you're interpreting as an institution. I mean, I don't know if it gets any bigger than that.
Yeah, it's cool. We're very fortunate to have it.
So what's the future look like for the museum? Is it a period of growth, or you have projects that you're looking forward to? What do you have on the horizon?
So we are continually updating our roster wall. As you know, we've gotten new players that have made it into the majors. Probably one of the most exciting projects that we're going to be working on shortly is, over the years, people have given us tons and tons of memorabilia that does connect with Nebraska Major League Baseball. And we have a project coming up where we are going to be able to display every single piece of the neat things that we've accumulated. And we're getting in brand new glass shelving that we're going to put throughout the museum. And we're really excited about that because we want to put things out and let people see them, but we just haven't had room. So we're making room. It's a pretty expensive project, but we feel if people are nice enough to give us things to display, we should display them. So we're going forward with that. Probably we're looking for most of that stuff to arrive hopefully within the next 30 to 45 days.
That's definitely an exciting process that's on the horizon for you. I know that can be just so rewarding of an experience. I'm speaking as a curator myself to tell those stories and to let those stories breathe and have a life. It's a very gratifying experience. One more question. Is there anything that you'd like people who haven't visited the museum to know about, and what would you like them to know?
One of the few museums that are open daily. We're open 9:30 to 4:30 daily. You can spend 5 minutes or 5 hours because just depends on what kind of interest you have in some of our local Nebraska native players, how much interest you have in it. And it's just, I think it would be a real rewarding opportunity for someone to be able to come to our museum and see all the things we have and how we've displayed them. And we're pretty proud of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that I know that there's the actual game-worn glove of Grover Cleveland Alexander, as well as baseball signed by the St. Louis Cardinals from the early days, I'm definitely gonna make the trip out there here very soon. As a Cardinals fan, I really look forward to it.
Great. We'll look forward to having you.
Loren Studley, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest in our museum.
This is going to conclude another episode of the Stuhr Crazy podcast. I really hope you enjoyed yourself. If you want to hear more historic fun content and you're a fan of Stuhr Museum, head on back because we have more episodes of the Stuhr Crazy podcast coming your way very soon. Thank you and have a good week.